I never imagined a wedding anniversary would be the night I finally chose my daughter over my own brother. Looking back, the words he said weren't what ended 31 years of keeping the family together. It was my granddaughter's silence in the car afterward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Late September in Asheville, North Carolina, still held on to summer the way it always did. Warm afternoons sliding into cool evenings that smelled like cut grass in somebody's grill 3 yards over. My daughter Rachel had rented the community hall behind her church for her and Tom's 10th anniversary party. String lights and mason jars and a folding table stacked with potluck dishes. If you'd driven past that parking lot, you'd have thought we were just an ordinary family celebrating an ordinary happy thing. I almost believed it myself. My granddaughter Sophie sat beside me on the drive over, 12 years old and nervous in the particular way kids get when they've worked hard on something. She had a shoebox on her lap wrapped in brown paper she'd painted herself, little gold stars along the edges. "You think Mom will like it?" she asked. "She's going to cry," I told her. "Guaranteed." Sophie had spent 6 weeks putting together a memory book for her parents. Photos, ticket stubs, a pressed flower from their wedding that Rachel had kept in a drawer for a decade. Sophie had found it going through old boxes and asked if she could use it. Nothing store-bought about any of it. Time was the gift. Care was the gift. When we walked in, the hall already smelled like fried chicken and someone's sweet tea, and somebody's Bluetooth speaker was playing old Otis Redding low enough to talk over. My younger brother Gary was already there, pouring himself a drink from the cooler he'd brought like he owned the place. "Hey there," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His wife Vanessa didn't look up from arranging her gift, a spa basket wrapped in glossy ribbon with a boutique's name printed right across the cellophane so nobody could miss it. Vanessa clocked Sophie's handmade box the second we set it on the gift table. "Oh," she said, smiling in that way that never once reached her eyes. "Somebody's crafty." Sophie beamed anyway. "I made it for Mom and Dad. It took me forever." "I'm sure it did." Vanessa turned back to her own gift, adjusting the bow like it needed her attention more than the conversation did. I'd watched this exact kind of thing happen for years. A little comment about Rachel's job as a school aide. A joke about the modest house she and Tom had worked so hard to pay off. Nothing loud enough to be a real fight, just enough to leave a mark you'd feel later, alone, wondering if you'd imagined it. Every time, I told myself it wasn't worth ruining somebody's good night. Every time, Rachel let it roll off her, or pretended to. Sophie tugged my sleeve. "Grandpa, why does Aunt Vanessa always do that?" "Do what, sweetheart?" "That fake smile thing." I didn't have a good answer, so I gave her the only one I had. "Some people don't know how to be happy for other people. That's on them, not you." She nodded slowly, the way kids do when they're not quite satisfied but decide to let it go anyway. Dinner got underway not long after, folding chairs scraping the floor, plates passed hand to hand. Talk drifted from Tom's job to somebody's new truck, to Gary bragging about a boat he was thinking of buying. Then, almost like it was nothing, Vanessa turned to Rachel. "I still don't know how you two make it work on a school aide salary. Must be tight." A couple of people laughed the nervous kind of laugh. Rachel set her fork down carefully. "Vanessa," she said, calm as anything. "Not tonight. Please." Just that. No raised voice, no insult thrown back. 2 words and a please. That's when Gary stood up so fast his chair nearly went over. I didn't understand what was happening until it had already happened. He crossed the space between them in about 3 steps, and before Tom or I could get up out of our seats, Gary had shoved Rachel's chair hard enough that she caught herself against the table, a plate shattering on the floor beside her. The whole hall went dead silent. Rachel didn't even raise her hands to protect herself. She was too stunned. Gary stood over her, red in the face. "You've been looking down your nose at us for years," he said. "Acting like you're better than everybody because you and your husband scrape by on nothing. Get some perspective." Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. I could hear the ceiling fan ticking overhead. That's how quiet it got. Then I heard something worse. Sophie's small voice next to me. "Grandpa." Her eyes had already filled up. "Did Uncle Gary hurt Mom because we're not rich?" That question did something to me that I still can't fully explain. I got down on one knee next to her chair and took both her hands. "No, honey," I said, looking straight at her. "Your uncle forgot what decency looks like. That's all this is." She nodded once, not really understanding, and maybe she wasn't supposed to at 12. I stood back up. Nobody had said a single word this whole time. Tom looked frozen solid. Vanessa had her arms crossed like she just won something. Gary looked at me, waiting, I think, for me to smooth it over the way I always had. Instead, I walked past him to Rachel. There was a red mark rising along her forearm where she'd caught the table edge. "You all right?" I asked quietly. She nodded, though we both knew that wasn't true. I helped her up. Tom had his arm around her before I even finished standing her up straight. Sophie slid her hand into her mother's without anybody telling her to. As I reached for the memory box on the gift table, I noticed it had been knocked to the floor sometime during the commotion. The paper torn along one side, a few loose photographs scattered under a chair. I crouched down and picked up every photo, one at a time, and slid them back into the box as gently as I could manage. Then I carried it out to the car myself. No goodbyes, no shouting, no promises to talk tomorrow. The drive back to our place felt twice as long as it should have. Rachel sat up front with me, quiet, her arm still red where it had hit the table. Nobody spoke for a long stretch of highway. Finally, she said, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry, Dad." I gripped the wheel tighter than I needed to. "No," I said, and my voice cracked doing it. "I'm the one who's sorry." She looked over at me. "I spent 31 years asking you to be patient with your uncle," I told her. "I should have spent that time asking him to be decent." She reached over and put her hand on my arm and left it there the rest of the drive. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch under the quilt her grandmother made years back, I sat alone at my kitchen table. In the drawer under the phone book, there was an old card my late wife had written me not long before she passed, one I hadn't taken out in years. Inside was one line that had always read like advice, and that night it read like a warning I'd been ignoring. "Someday you'll have to pick between keeping everybody comfortable and keeping your family safe." I read it 3 times. Then I put it back and turned off the kitchen light. My phone buzzed on the counter before I'd even sat back down. Gary, then Gary again, then Vanessa. I turned it face down and went to bed. The next morning I made coffee and sat by the window looking out at my own backyard. Quiet and ordinary in the early light. 14 missed calls. 1 voicemail, Gary's name on the screen. I pressed play. His voice came out shaky, nothing like the man who'd shoved his own niece's mother the night before. "Look, I know I lost it. Just call me back so we can figure this out." I stood there at that window a long while. For the first time in 31 years, I did absolutely nothing about one of Gary's messes. I wish I could tell you it came easy. It didn't. I stood in that kitchen with coffee going cold in my hand while his voice replayed in my head, "Just call me back so we can figure this out." 31 years of habit told me to grab my truck keys and go smooth things over, same as I always did. That was my whole role in this family, the one who fixed it. Instead, I looked back out the window. Sophie was already outside in our yard, still in her pajamas, throwing a tennis ball for the neighbor's dog like nothing in the world had happened the night before. Rachel came out onto the porch a minute later with 2 cups of coffee, and they laughed about something I couldn't hear from inside. For the first time in a long time, I understood that my family was smaller than I'd been treating it. Rachel, Tom, Sophie. That was it. That was the whole thing worth protecting. The phone rang again. I turned it face down without looking at it. Rachel came in a few minutes later. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said gently. "I'm not deciding today." "Then what are you doing?" I thought about it a long moment. "Nothing," I said, and I almost smiled saying it. "I'm doing nothing." That sounded simple. It wasn't. Doing nothing meant I had to stop being the man who rescued Gary from every situation his own temper got him into. 2 days later, another voicemail landed. Vanessa, this time, her voice tight and clipped. "Gary's truck got repossessed. He needs to borrow against something, and he's asking about Dad's old fishing cabin. Call me." I knew that cabin. I'd kept the deed clean for 20 years, paid the property taxes every spring out of my own account so Gary wouldn't lose the one thing our father had left us jointly. Every fall I drove up and winterized the pipes myself so they wouldn't burst. Not because anybody asked, because if I didn't do it, it simply wouldn't get done. I deleted the voicemail. That afternoon I helped Sophie glue her memory book back together at the kitchen table, smoothing torn photograph edges, replacing the paper on the outside with a plain brown wrap she picked out at the drugstore. She painted new gold stars along the border, better than the first ones, she said, because now she knew what she was doing. "Grandpa," she said, holding a photo steady while I taped the spine. "Is Uncle Gary still mad?" I set the tape down. I don't know, sweetheart. Are we mad? No. Then why would we go help him? Kids ask the questions grown adults spend years avoiding. I sat back in my chair. Helping somebody is a gift, I told her. It stops being a gift the second they think they're owed it, no matter how they treat you. She thought that over. Mom always tried to be nice to Uncle Gary. She did, and he pushed her. I looked toward the window, where Rachel was out watering her flower beds like it was any regular Tuesday. Sometimes, I said quietly, people don't understand what they've got until it's gone. That night, Gary called 4 more times. I let every one of them ring out. The following week, Vanessa left a voicemail that sounded almost frantic. The cabin's got a burst pipe, water's everywhere. We can't get anybody out there till Monday because of the holiday weekend rates. I knew exactly why the pipe had burst. Nobody had winterized it that fall. I'd been the one doing it every October for 2 decades, and this was the first year I hadn't gone. I closed the message without playing the rest. It stung more than I expected, not because of the cabin, not because of money, because every single mess reminded me of another year I'd quietly cleaned up after somebody without ever once asking why nobody else had learned to. Rachel noticed it sitting on my face at dinner. You can still go up there, Dad. I know. Nobody would blame you. I'd blame myself, I said, for teaching him one more time that there's no cost to how he treats people. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm not asking you to pick me over your own brother. You didn't have to ask. I already made that choice. She looked down at the table. I should have told you to make it years ago. That Saturday, I took Sophie out to the lake near our house, just the 2 of us, and she jumped off the dock probably 30 times until her lips turned faintly blue and she was laughing too hard to climb the ladder. Halfway through the afternoon, she slipped her hand into mine, dripping wet, and said, I like this weekend. I stopped walking. Even with everything that happened? She nodded. Nobody yelled today. 4 words. They stayed with me the rest of that afternoon. My granddaughter had started measuring a good day by how much yelling was in it. No child ought to have to keep score like that. By the middle of October, the calls slowed to almost nothing. Then an envelope showed up in my mailbox instead. Forwarded from the county, a past due notice on the cabin's property insurance. It wasn't addressed to me anymore, technically, since I'd signed my portion of the trusteeship duties over informally to Gary years back. But it had followed old habit and landed in my box anyway. I set it on the counter, unopened toward him, and didn't call to warn him it was coming. Not because I wanted to see him lose the cabin, because for the first time whatever happened next with it would be something Gary had to actually manage himself. A few days after that, somebody pounded on my front door hard enough to rattle the little window beside it. Gary. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since the anniversary party. You've got some nerve, he said before I'd even gotten the door all the way open. Morning to you too, I said. Don't do that. Cabin's flooded, insurance lapsed, and you're acting like none of it's your problem. I didn't shove your niece's mother into a table, Gary. That's not what this is about. I think it's exactly what this is about. He ran a hand down his face. You've handled everything with that cabin for 20 years. Now all of a sudden you can't be bothered? I can't be bothered to keep doing it quietly while you knock my daughter around at a party and never once say you're sorry. You mean you won't? I didn't correct him. He stood there a long moment, shaking his head. I don't even know where to start with any of this. The insurance, the pipes, the taxes. For the first time, I actually believed he meant it. He genuinely didn't know where to start because he'd never once had to. I glanced back toward my garage. Behind an old workbench sat a filing box I'd kept for years. Every tax receipt, every repair invoice, every insurance renewal on that cabin going back to when our father passed it to us both. Maybe, I said, it's about time you saw what actually keeping that place running has looked like. Gary stood on my porch a full minute after I said that, staring past me like he could see straight through to the garage. What box? The one that explains why you don't know where to start. I don't need a lecture, Ray. That's my name, Ray Whitfield, in case that hasn't come up yet. Wasn't planning on giving you one. Part of me wanted to shut the door right there. Another part remembered all the years I'd stayed quiet because I told myself silence was the same thing as keeping peace. It wasn't the same thing at all. Come on in, I said. Rachel glanced up from the kitchen when Gary walked past her. She didn't say anything, just nodded once before heading upstairs to check on Sophie's homework. Gary watched her go. and I saw him notice the fading mark still on her forearm if you knew where to look for it. He lowered his eyes. I didn't mean to. I know. No, he swallowed hard. I really didn't think I pushed that hard. I believe that too. It didn't undo what happened. It only explained a small piece of it. I brought the filing box in from the garage and set it on my dining table. Gary let out a short laugh, disbelieving. You're kidding me. I'm not. He lifted the lid. Inside were folders sorted by year, going all the way back to 2004, right after our father died and left us the cabin jointly. He pulled the first one out, property taxes. I nodded. Paid those every spring since Dad passed. He opened another. Roof repairs after the storm in '09. Another, well pump replacement. Another, insurance renewals, septic pumping, a dock rebuild after ice damage, a stack of gas receipts from all the trips up there over 2 decades. Gary stopped flipping through. His voice went quiet. I don't understand. I thought we split this. You were never supposed to feel like you owed me anything for it. What do you mean? I never wanted you feeling guilty about it, Gary, so I just never told you the real numbers. He sat down heavy in the chair across from me. I thought the place basically took care of itself. So did you. That was the point. He looked genuinely confused. What? I never wanted you to think of yourself as somebody who couldn't keep up his half, so I let you believe it mostly ran on its own. Quiet sat between us a long moment. Finally, Gary asked, how much, over the years? I leaned back in my chair. Stopped adding it up a while back. No, tell me. Tell. I hesitated. Somewhere past 50,000. 20 years, give or take. His head snapped up. What? 50-some thousand, spread out over 2 decades. He ran both hands through his hair. I had no idea, Ray. I know. He pulled out one more folder, a spiral notebook tucked inside. What's this? Maintenance log. He flipped it open to a random page. April 3rd, drained and flushed the water heater. September 19th, patched the dock after the storm. Every page the same. Dates, parts, cost, notes. No complaining anywhere in it. Just work, written down plain. He closed the notebook slow. You came up here this often? About twice a season, sometimes more. His face went pale. I lived 20 minutes from that cabin. I didn't have an answer for that one, because there wasn't a kind way to say it. That's when Vanessa let herself in through the side door without so much as a knock. Figured your truck would be here, she said to Gary, then looked at the table. What is all this? Gary didn't answer. She picked up a receipt, then another, scanning them. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. So you kept paperwork. Big deal. I always do. She crossed her arms. You're still his brother. Family's supposed to help family. They are, I said. There you go. That's exactly my point, I said. There's a difference between choosing to help somebody and them believing they're entitled to it no matter how they treat you. She scoffed. Sounds like the same thing to me. It isn't, I said, and I met her eyes when I said it. Not even close. The room went quiet again. Gary looked from me to Vanessa, then back down at the box, his shoulders dropping another inch. You never once asked either of us for a dime. No. You never even brought it up. No. Why? I gave him a small, humorless smile. Because I thought that's what family did for each other, quietly. He looked like somebody had hit him. I should have helped without being asked. You should have known there was something to help with. Before either of us could say much else, my phone buzzed on the counter. Caller ID read Marcus Boyd, our family's longtime attorney, the man who'd drawn up Dad's estate papers all those years back. I stepped into the hallway. Marcus. Ray. His voice had that same measured calm it always carried. I met with Gary's wife this morning. I closed my eyes. Figured she'd get around to that. She has some questions about how the cabin's ownership was structured. About whether you've been managing your father's estate fairly between the two of you. I almost laughed. Managing it how exactly? Exactly my question, he sighed. I told her you've never drawn a dime out of that property, and if anything, you've put in far more than your half ever required. She believe you? Not yet. Another pause. Ray? Yeah. I've handled your family's affairs for close to 25 years. I don't think I've seen many people do more than what was asked of them, and ask for less credit for it. I looked back toward the dining room, where Gary sat surrounded by 2 decades of quiet paperwork, and Vanessa had finally gone silent. When I hung up and walked back in, Gary looked up at me. "So what now?" I looked at the box, then at my younger brother. "Now," I said, "you learned something Dad probably hoped we'd never need reminding of." I turned toward the hallway closet, where behind some old coats hung a small metal box that had sat there untouched since our father's funeral. Inside was a letter in his handwriting I hadn't read since the week he died. I'd carried what it said around in my head for years without ever opening it again. I didn't take it out that afternoon. I just rested my hand on top of the box. "Not yet," I told Gary. He frowned. "I thought you said Dad wanted us to know something." "He did. But there's a few things you need to see for yourself first." The next morning, I drove out to Marcus's office downtown. I hadn't wanted to go. After everything that happened at the party, another meeting about family money was the last thing I wanted on my calendar. Marcus met me with the same steady handshake he'd given me for a quarter-century. He'd known our father before the diagnosis that eventually took him, knew every clause of that estate better than anybody left living. "Vanessa's here," he said quietly. Insisted on it. That didn't surprise me either. He led me into the small conference room. Gary looked older than he had 3 weeks earlier. All the usual bluster gone out of him. Vanessa still carried herself like somebody who expected to walk out winning. Marcus closed the door and opened a thick binder in front of him. "I've gone through every document connected to your father's estate," he began, including everything Ray provided voluntarily. He turned pages as he spoke. Property taxes, insurance premiums, roof repairs, well pump, septic, dock rebuild, decades of gas receipts documented mile by mile. The room got quieter with every page he turned. Finally, he closed the binder. "I've reached one conclusion," he said, and looked straight at Gary. "Ray has done substantially more for that property than his half of the estate ever required." Vanessa crossed her arms. "So?" Marcus didn't look at her. "The estate required equal responsibility for upkeep between the two brothers. It never required Ray to personally absorb costs that exceeded what was reasonable to expect from one party." Gary blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if Ray had managed this the way the estate strictly allowed, he could have pushed to sell that cabin over a decade ago rather than keep covering costs alone." He looked at me a moment before going on. "Instead, he quietly carried it." Vanessa finally spoke. "Well, that's what family does." Marcus turned to her for the first time. "No," he said, still perfectly polite. "Family helps because they choose to. What you're describing is entitlement, and it's a different thing entirely." Nobody argued that, not even her. Gary stared down at the polished table. "I didn't know any of this." I believed him. He genuinely hadn't. Somehow that made the whole thing sadder rather than easier. Marcus reached for one more folder. "There's a final matter." He slid a copy of the estate documents across to Gary. "Your father named Ray as primary steward of this property because he trusted Ray's judgment, not because he loved him more." Gary looked up slowly. "So Dad knew." "He knew Ray's character," Marcus said, and almost smiled. "And having gone through 20 years of records, I'd say he judged that correctly." Nobody spoke for a while. Then Vanessa pushed her chair back. "So that's it then. There's no legal claim here," Marcus said, "and if one were filed, it would fail." She looked frustrated but had nothing left to argue with. The meeting ended quiet, no shouting, no big speeches. Just people standing up one at a time, carrying truths that suddenly weighed a lot more than they had an hour before. Outside in the parking lot, Gary caught up to me. "I owe you an apology, a real one. You don't owe me anything today." "I do." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I kept thinking that cabin just held itself together somehow. Turns out it depended on me showing up twice a season for 20 years. He nodded slow. "I never really saw what you were carrying. I made sure you didn't have to." We stood there another minute before heading our separate ways. Life found a different rhythm after that. The phone stopped ringing every single day. Rachel laughed more easily around the house. Sophie stopped asking whether her uncle was still mad and started talking about school again, about a boy she liked, about nothing that mattered and everything that did. One Saturday, she came tearing into the garage while I was sorting old paint cans. "Grandpa," she waved a piece of paper over her head. "I won." "Won what?" Her school had run a fall art contest before the semester break, judging delayed because of some scheduling mix-up. First place, her memory book. the one Vanessa had barely glanced at back in September. Rachel read the letter twice before she started smiling. "I'm so proud of you, baby." Sophie looked up at her. "You think Uncle Gary would like it now?" Rachel hesitated, then knelt down next to her. "I hope someday he understands why it mattered in the first place." That answer stuck with me. Not because it promised anything, because Rachel still hoped, even after all of it. Winter came and went. Spring showed up slow the way it does in the mountains, green creeping back into the hills a little at a time. One evening while I was grilling out back, Gary called. His voice sounded different this time, tired in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "Vanessa wants me to ask you something." I waited. "She wants to know if she can see Sophie again sometime." I looked through my kitchen window. Rachel and Sophie were out on the porch, stringing up little solar lights along the railing, laughing over something that had gotten tangled. "I'll think about it," I told him. "She knows she doesn't deserve it right off." "I know." Long silence. Then Gary said something I never expected to hear out of him. "Ray?" "Yeah. I think Vanessa's finally starting to understand what she actually lost that night." After we hung up, I stood alone out back until the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. A few days later, an envelope showed up in the mailbox. Vanessa's handwriting on the front, careful, like she'd rewritten the address more than once. Inside was a single sheet, no long explanation, just one line. "If it's all right, I'd like to come to your 4th of July cookout this year." I folded it back up and set it on the counter and looked at it a long while. Some things heal fast. Others need more than one apology note to get there. And some decisions shouldn't be made by whoever was hurt the least by the whole thing. I looked out toward the porch, where Sophie was chasing lightning bugs in a jar. If anybody had a right to decide what happened next, it wasn't me. The 4th of July came in hotter than the forecast had promised. By early afternoon, the yard smelled like charcoal and cut grass and Rachel's potato salad cooling on the picnic table. Sophie ran through the sprinkler with the neighbor kids, shrieking every time the water hit her, stopping every few minutes to ask if the burgers were ready yet before tearing off again. Watching her laugh without checking over her shoulder every couple minutes, that was something I still wasn't fully used to. Gary showed up first, carrying a bowl of baked beans, looking uneasy standing at the gate. "You sure this is all right? I invited you." Wasn't talking about me. I knew exactly who he meant. Before I could answer, another car pulled slow into the driveway. Vanessa got out alone. She looked smaller than I remembered her. Not in size, just older somehow. No designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, no styled hair done up for an occasion, just a plain cotton dress and sandals. In her hands, a small box wrapped in brown paper. No bow, no boutique name printed anywhere on it. For a moment, nobody moved. Rachel reached over and took my hand quiet. "It's your call, Dad," she whispered. "No," I said. "It's yours." Vanessa crossed the yard one slow step at a time. When she reached us, she didn't try to hug anybody. She didn't even look at me first. She looked straight at Rachel. "I owe you something I've never given you," she said. Rachel waited. "My respect." The words sat there in the warm afternoon air a second. Vanessa took a breath. "I've been rehearsing this for weeks." She glanced around at everybody standing there. "Would it be all right if I said it out loud now?" Nobody objected. Gary pulled a folding chair out for her. She didn't sit. She stood in front of all of us and unfolded a piece of paper from her pocket, hands trembling a little. "I spent most of my life trying to seem like I came from somewhere better than I did," she said, looking down at the grass. "My daddy drank through most of what we had growing up." She smiled, sad about it. "We moved 4 times before I was 10 because we couldn't keep up rent." Rachel looked surprised. So did Gary. "I hated every bit of it," Vanessa said, her voice catching. "Told myself I'd never live like that again." She paused. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being scared of being poor and started being scared of anybody who reminded me I once was. Quiet settled over the whole backyard. "I judged you before I ever really knew you," she said, looking at Rachel. "Told myself where you worked and what you made mattered more than who you actually were as a person." She wiped at one eye. "When I made those little comments over the years, I told myself it was just teasing." She shook her head slow. "The party." She closed her eyes a second. "What I let Gary do, what I said right before it, that's something I'll carry the rest of my life." Rachel didn't say anything yet. Vanessa turned towards Sophie. "And I hurt somebody who never did anything except love her family." Sophie stepped a little closer to her mother without thinking about it. I understand if none of you forgive me today. Vanessa held the small box out. I brought you something. She handed it to Rachel. Rachel looked over at me. I nodded. She untied the plain string around it carefully. Inside sat the memory book, Sophie's memory book, the cover repaired, the torn photographs reset and pressed flat under new plastic sleeves, the gold stars touched up along the border. Sophie gasped. "That's mine!" "It was," Vanessa said. "I found it in Gary's truck a few weeks back. Must have gotten swept up with everything else that night." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I couldn't get the tear in the cover completely invisible again." Sophie traced the seam with one finger. "But I fixed what I could," Vanessa said. "I kept thinking, if I could fix the book, maybe I'd figure out how to fix what I actually broke." Nobody rushed to fill the quiet after that. Some moments don't need filling. Sophie looked up at me. "Grandpa." I knelt down next to her, same as I had back in September. "Yes, honey." She glanced toward her aunt. "Are you still mad at her?" I smiled at her gentle as I could. "How I feel isn't really the important part right now." She frowned. "It isn't? You got hurt too, in your own way." She looked back at Vanessa, then at her mother, then at me again. "So what happens now?" I put a handlight on her shoulder. "That part belongs to you." She didn't answer right away. She walked slow across the yard instead. Vanessa stayed exactly where she stood, didn't reach out, didn't ask for anything. Sophie stopped in front of her. "It's still got the crack in it if you look close," Sophie said. Vanessa nodded. "I know." Sophie almost smiled. "Nobody in this family's perfect either." Then she wrapped both arms around her aunt. Vanessa cried quiet into her shoulder. Rachel leaned into me. "Wasn't expecting that," she said softly. Neither was I. A little while later, everybody finally sat down to eat. Conversation wasn't loud or forced, just careful. And somehow that felt more honest than every easy smile we'd traded over the years before that night. After dinner, Gary helped me break down the grill. "I'm sorry," he said quiet. "I should have carried more of this family's weight a long time ago." "You can start now." He nodded. "I will." For the first time, I actually believed him. As the sun started going down, Vanessa came over one more time before they left. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were." "They won't," I told her honestly. She lowered her head. "I know. We'll still come around, though, if that's all right." "It is. But there'll be some ground rules." "There will." "God. No comments about what anybody makes or where they came from." "None. And if Sophie ever feels unwelcome around us, you'll leave," I finished for her. "I would too," she said, sad but steady about it. When she and Gary drove off that evening, I stood in my own driveway and realized I didn't feel like I'd won anything. This was never really about winning to begin with. It was about finally standing next to the people who'd been quietly standing next to me the whole time, every single day, whether I noticed it or not. Later that night, once the fireworks down the street had faded out and Sophie had fallen asleep with her repaired memory book on her nightstand, Rachel and I sat together out on the porch steps. She rested her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, "Grandma was right about you." I smiled. She usually was. She used to say you'd give away your last dollar and never mention it. I looked out toward the yard, quiet now, string lights still glowing faint along the fence. "I finally learned when not to," I said. "The strange thing about drawing a line with somebody is that it doesn't always push them away for good. Sometimes it's the only thing solid enough to build something honest back on top of. If there's one thing this whole year taught me, it's that loving your family should never mean swallowing your own dignity to keep the peace. The people who really love you will learn to respect where you stand, or they'll show you exactly why you needed to stand there in the first place." If any of this sounded familiar to somebody watching tonight, thank you for sitting with me through it. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping everybody comfortable and keeping the people you love safe, I hope you know you're not the only one who's had to make that choice. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone isn't rescuing them again. It's stepping back so they finally see what they've been leaning on. Real love makes room for boundaries, and real family finds its way back through honesty, not silence. Keep showing up for the people who show up for you too, and let the rest learn on their own time. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine, positive life lesson with you.